All right. So we'll get started here. So basically it comes down to I'm going to turn my video off so we don't chew it up. Comes down to sensing. Your body is one of the greatest instruments on the planet as far as being aware of what's here and what's further away and how there's commonalities to it. So very much creativity and rate of change are very dominant factors in water's behavior and the universe's behavior. So we might refer to them as fundamental universal laws. Too much and too little, really. Paracelsus basically said everything was a poison. We'll get to the polar opposite of that here shortly. But it's all about the dose. So anything that's good for you, if you do it too much, it becomes bad. We all know these types of things. That's what we're doing with our life. So the same is true application of engineering and science and technology. So what's good for one is not necessarily good for other. So, for instance, the carbon gene units that we now manufacture and have been out in a kind of a controlled market so we can make sure we get everything right and good quality. And, in an application, you can control how long and how much energy you're putting into that. And just like lifting weights, for some people at first, it's too much. It's a detox that's difficult, potentially, depending on what they're trying to accomplish. And that's the second big attribute that's going to go on here through this 4-part series, is how the human being plays a direct role in everything they do with their thoughts, and their actions. Their attention and intention has a huge effect. So if you just kind of drink water and don't think about it, then water's going to do its thing, and it might do its thing faster or slower because it has more potential to do that. But it's not really going to target anything because you're not targeted anything. So I can't stress enough that there's more than enough evidence all throughout history that water, and not only water, the whole environment, the ether, if you will, the undense liquid that the universe is made out of, fluid, that is constantly evolving with everything and helping everything evolve. Unless things don't want to evolve by their actions or their intentions, and then the universe seems to help that happen too. It supports freedom, or the law of allowance. So it doesn't mind evil at all. The evil is just to us. To it, evil is something that tears something else down to rebuild it better the next time because it's unhappy with it. So the universe supports all sides of that. So that kind of... I don't know if my screen's jammed up because there's so many people on, but it's not letting me switch. There we go. All right, so just some good people to have on record. Reich got down into the biology of things and also the universal physics, which revealed a greater understanding of what disease is and what disease isn't. Carrie Reams basically looks at the spin state of the body through urine and mouth pH, conductivity in the blood, carbohydrate levels in the blood, not just sugar, not just glucose, all the carbohydrates. So you can kind of see if you're going to become diabetic about 5-6 years before you actually have high glucose levels. Really cool stuff. They're pretty easy to look these guys up, so I'm not going to go into the details, and I've talked a lot about them in the past. Tesla, of course, huge subtle guy. He called the subtle energy the medium, where the ether, or what you can explain, what you can't define, starts to interact with the electromagnetic field and matter, and he called that the medium. Steinmetz went on to define dimensions, what they called counter space. So in electrical engineering, they couldn't explain phenomena, so they had to make other dimensions. And if all of you remember imaginary numbers in math, they actually came from negative j and positive j and the inversions of that to the negative 1. So a polar flip-flop, if you will, a north and a south pole. So you could go a dimension this way and a dimension that way to extract, say, different types of energy. The Mayans called it the underworld and the overworld. And the dielectric equilibrium, or the ground, where these forces cancel, and everything is built either down, like roots of a tree are growing towards the center of the earth. Very similar pattern, but in a slightly different way. There's not a trunk in the roots of the tree. There's a trunk when it's growing up towards the sky. So, but if you looked at over and under, it would look like lungs or a river, all that same. We'll get to that. Walter Russell's probably one of the greatest guys for using temperature and breathing to explain all the atoms and all the properties of the universe. It's really that simple. Ties it to music and color. Drunvalo basically really runs into basic geometry, circles and squares, and how they set up interference patterns, square being male, circle being female, and how at certain points the circle is outside the male and at other points the square surrounds the circle. And there's mathematical and geometric transcription to that explains all the Pythagoras and the mystery schools, Da Vinci, Plato, all them. Marco Rodin, he's not the guy who really invented VBM or vortex-based mathematics, but everybody seemed to know this in history who developed technology and health, whether it's for health of the planet or people, it's all really the same. And of course, Victor Schauberger and his son, Walter, was more mathematical, and Victor was much more subjective and intuitive. So the purpose of this is practical, not theoretical, or not to get into debates about, how the universe works and how it doesn't, but just to understand some of the basic mechanics so you can use them for healing, for growing plants better, for, treating your water, all sorts of different things. And as far as using magnets to heal, certain people do that. So if we're lucky, we'll have a guest who is very well educated and in practice of that. And so we can take some of these concepts, which you're going to see, it's not like science where it's black and white and on and off. There are opposing behaviors. And I tried to demonstrate that with the asymmetry of the magnet, because everybody talks about balance, but actually balance is where nothing exists. It's space, it's undefinable, it doesn't have property. So when people talk about fields being in space, that isn't space. Space is simply space. There's nothing in it, there's no property, there's nothing discernible. However, it could be beyond our perception. So lines and circles, that's like Drunvalo comes out into this crazy like Pythagoras math, and it's like you think you understand the whole universe mathematically and geometrically at some point. And water, a living thing, the more it's alive, the more it'll work with you, the better relationship you have with water is directly related to the intelligence of the time and attention and intention you put into it, just like everything else, nothing different. Very important to remember that. Now, Paracelsus, all things are poisons, for there's nothing without poisonous qualities. It is only the dose which makes the thing poison. Very true, because you're breathing uranium. Not going to kill you. Too much of it will definitely cause trouble, right? It seems like the further you get up the atomic table with certain elements, that's how it goes. So this is my basic recipe and everybody else's in much simpler terms. There's obviously books and material and all sorts of things in this world to describe what this is in very fancy words. But if you do this, so if you go to your doctor and say, what do I do? This is what he should tell you to do. And if you're not doing enough push-ups, you should do more push-ups. If you're not walking enough, you should walk more. And the quality of the motion and the right stress is kind of our physical being and our exercise. Our mind is viewing all of this, the water, the food, the stress, the sunlight. I don't have darkness in here, but darkness is just as important as sunlight. And that might be rest in the end. Rest could be converse to sunlight. And the microbiome, right? So we're actually governed by a lot of critters, and it's a terrain model dominates over the kind of the germ model. And so your bloods and your organs and the blood that flows through them sets up the total environment for the microbiome. which is affected by all these subtle energies, affected by the spirits you're harboring, the spirits that your soul's harboring, and it's all the body. But it starts really with the mind and consciousness. But we also know that consciousness doesn't just exist in the mind, because if consciousness exists in water, then it exists throughout the entire body. All right, so the whole thing's falling apart right now. Everybody's freaking out. You know, it's a big fake system. You know, matrix, they say, probably a false matrix, not the real matrix. So now we have to rebuild foundations about how we go forward with life. And everybody likes freedom, and with that becomes responsibility. And you can't have one without the other, basically. So if you lose your health, you're losing all your freedom for sure. I can guarantee you it's worse than being in jail. So here's some of the patterns we talked about that repeat. A lot of this is in other webinars and throughout history. Nothing really changes, so you kind of got to go with it. I mentioned phi, so we'll just say there's a circular version of phi comprised of not squares, but rectangles or asymmetry. Right? It's all asymmetry. It's not repeated squares over and over and over again. And when we see repeated squares in water, we have a problem. And when we see repeated squares in the blood, we have a problem. So it's true that there are straight lines in nature that tell the curved lines where to turn, where to change radius. And so the quarter wave, Tesla talked to, and John Bedini, they talk about the quarter wave is the only really thing. The full sine wave really doesn't matter. That's why. Is because if you do it right, it twists and gets smaller and smaller and smaller, or bigger and bigger and bigger. Again, there's only two things happening in the whole universe. Things are compressing and things are expanding. And creation is a bound, so they're always going to do it in a different way along the same line of general principle. Just like two people are never going to drive the car the same way, but they both have to steer, brake, and hit the accelerator. So the heart and mind working together get the whole body in a place that's really good. Everybody kind of knows that. It's kind of like magnetism and electricism. You can't really take the two apart. And those seem to be very center points of the chakra system, or standing wave energies that hold memory, that are supported by water, that basically drive the electromagnetic system of the body, that conventional medicine kind of looks at it at this point. And just as a note, like when we first started using asymmetrical magnets, I had trouble getting them, and so I would just buy them all up. And when the magnet companies would call me, and they assumed I was doing medical research, because that's who normally buys all the magnets. So somebody was buying them up from us, and so I just bought them all up so we didn't, have that problem. And I asked, well, who else is buying them up? And they said it's being used in research. Well, if you medically use magnets to research and you don't know what they are and what the hell you're doing with them, because you're applying conventional electromagnetism and they don't even understand the magnet. And if you want to learn magnets, Ken Wheeler all the way, from a more, I'm not even going to say conventional, from a more electromagnetic, or the same thing in the end. Things are either in compression or rarefication, and that's all it is, but it's never an isolated circumstance. So what are you connected to? So you come to this situation where to be logical, you already have 4 poles in the most basic assessment of the universe. So the North Pole has an integrative portion, which is a very small, if we had a big puck magnet, it's very small and in the center of that, like if the magnet was a foot wide and it was symmetrical. So right in that center is the integrative force. So what if you bring that to a cone? Now you just kind of took away the other force, which on the outside of the magnet is pressure, what we call magnetism. It's pressure. And so we took away the pressure where the point of the cone is. But I almost guarantee you none of the medical research people really know that all that well. And here we have two sides of the coin: 0 pH, which is pure acid at the theoretical extreme, and then calcium on the other side would be the pH of 14. One's going to bias towards hydrogen, the lower pH, the other's oxygen. You absolutely need them both. Everything dies when this football gets out to the points, and that green circle in the center is where the body oscillates in health. And as you see, when you move out towards the points or out towards the edges, the vibrations along those lines, you have a blue line, a white line, a red line, and those represent getting stuck in states. So there's many doctors in history, conventionally and unconventionally, who document meridians, acupuncture points, voltages. Jerry Tennant, Dr. Vole, and basically they mapped out all the ancient stuff, and we're like, well, these people knew what they were doing 6,000 years ago. And all these things come together in complexity to the simple, balance of your body in its own asymmetry, your own uniqueness, essentially. And if you look at the yin and yang, you're going to see right away that there's a dot inside of the white, a black dot in the white. And so there will be conflict depending on if we're pointing at the black dot, but we're over in the yin energy, the poles are going to reverse. So one thing I learned about water is when you overcharge it one way, it'll flip its pole eventually, depending on, how much energy is put in per impulse or continuous DC. So when we get to the subtle energy, it's definitely like seeks like. And you can see when we made asymmetrical magnets, we could turn the attraction off or on, and we could make like poles overlap with each other, which you can't do with symmetrical magnets. Whether they're round or square, you can't get them to overlap with each other very well, and they certainly won't come around and make a circle or a toroid, as I showed earlier with the cone magnets. So all throughout history, there's been these subtle energy, the ether, all named different things, and the qualities are not the same from one to other, but the principles are. So, if Bob looks at something, he comes out with a detailed view and he calls it prana, and Jim looks at it and calls it chi. And then chi and prana get together and we go, hey, it's like 90% the same, but I saw some exceptions here and you saw some exceptions there. And such is life. That's the way it works. I'm not going to get too much into this, but if you look at figure 18, the lines, straight lines going inward towards the dark center would be considered the integrative or the gravity or the resistance also. So you see they take on both qualities. So the North Pole can have a good quality to it and a bad quality to it depending on what it's interacting with, and so can the South Pole. And the concentric circles are what you call magnetism. So you have dielectric forces and magnetism, and depending on how you look at the iron filings around a magnet and how you orient it will tell you that both are present at the exact same time, and all you can do is make them asymmetrical. So if we want more integrative force and less pressure, I think you guys can guess what we would do to the shape of the magnet. I think it jumped over my... So here's two charges, and look at the asymmetry. The charge in the sky is very positive here, and around the ground are thousands of little streamers. And the lightning actually looks and goes back like it's telling the rest of the charges what they need to do to balance out, and then goes forward. It's the exact same behavior as it's called a step leader with lightning. And fungus does the same thing. It has leaders or scouts that go out through the ground and then come back and communicate to the rest of the community where we need to go to get what we need. So in the end, single-celled organisms are intelligent, especially when they're collective, and so are the charges of the universe, because they come out of the ether, which is everywhere all the time. So you see, if we take two magnets and here you see the lines of tension that's trying to connect them, but you also see in the middle there's always a 90-degree line. But when we look at the iron filings, we don't see that. We don't really see a line there. But we do see a total change in behavior if we take a foot long by 1 inch diameter magnets and we connect them all together. Let's just say they're a ½ inch apiece, so we put 24 of them together. That has a totally different effect on the field that interacts with other things than a solid bar magnet. So there is a difference even though we always can't see it with our method of observation. Here you got water polarizing like a magnet into attraction and separation. And you can see this is back in the 1700s, 1800s. They were doing this stuff to check water quality. Still one of the better methods to check water quality, but gets a little finicky with the environment we have nowadays. I was able to get them to work like outside of metal buildings, but I couldn't get them to work inside of metal buildings, which is also telling us something. So now you have this plus and minus charge, and if that's all we have, then what do the plus and minus charge wrap around each other and move together like a water vortex, right? You got opposites in an imbalance causing things to circle 90 degrees to where the vortex ends up, or tornado. And then, of course, sacred geometry ends up within the magnetic field, because sacred geometry and fractals are the actual matrix of the universe. The square grid pattern that people think is the matrix, not so much. That's the programming. That's, what we might call the bad stuff or the evil stuff. And so you see there's an energy pattern, and then matter follows the energy pattern. So if you take these energy patterns and apply them, then they tend to grow things, and also flowers and trees and humans and earths and suns all die. And so there's a point in the cycle, it's very short towards the end of life, where this whole pole flips around. And some people live in that state for a long, long time. So you can, use these tools to help with that. Now here's a picture. This is probably one of the most profound things ever recorded in the universe, and I don't think it even made the news, of course. But this is a SOHO satellite image of the sun being the bright yellow thing, of course, and a dark thing, opposites, right? Very bright, very dark. And the dark thing is about the size of Jupiter, and it's basically a plasma sphere. And it's gravitating so hard that it won't let any light out, and it's not making any light yet. So people who think light is full of energy, that's actually the release of energy. That's actually exhaustion or breathing out. Or it's breathing in and replenishing itself, right? The sun changes all the time, breathing in and out, and it does solar flares and black spots. And so, a black spot's a similar thing. So I don't know if the sun gives birth to planets in this way, but that's an obvious speculation. And the point I'm bringing to this is we talk about the poles, the two poles present, and the North and the South Pole, right? And they wind around each other, the positive and plus and minus dielectric charge, and they wind around each other, and there's two of them. There's an infinite amount, just like color. And if we had to assign poles, we would say the North Pole is blue and the South Pole is red. Red is going towards black, and blue is going towards white, and white and black are indiscernible from each other. Mathematically or geometrically, so it means logic is actually false. There's no such thing as logic, really. There's your logic, there's the collective logic of the human being, but that's about it. Here you see three smaller vortexes wind together, and then you'll see the giant plasma ball take off. It just takes off, so defies the gravity of the sun. It's way smaller, it's dark. Gives you some practical things to look at in the macro sense of the universe itself. So the connective lines of tension, when we string a guitar up, if it's not strung enough, the string just flops around and it doesn't vibrate, doesn't sustain a note, doesn't come into being, has no chance at contributing to harmony. And then we tighten it up the right amount, and there's this window that the string can vibrate in, and it's based on its length and thickness and the body it's connected to. And so that's string theory. It's all you need to know about quantum mechanics, and that's all you need to know is there's strings connecting everything, and under the proper tension, they're capable of communicating harmony through certain relationships, which we call geometry. Concentric lines of pressure, that's magnetism. Very, very simple. Most physicists don't know this, so they're all confused, renaming everything, and running off in left field with research, and it certainly can get confusing. So rotation has a pole, and it has an orientation. So you kind of got to know what you're doing with the orientation, just like you need to know where to put the finger on the guitar to get the right note. So you learn a scale, you stay in this area, you memorize what the right notes are, your muscle memory takes over, and then you feel, you don't think what you're going to play, you feel what you're going to play, and you become one with the band or whatever it is. I don't know who this guy is, but I came across the quote and it's exactly what I would say. I don't tell you anything new. I just want to inform you of the most important thing in life you have forgotten. There's a higher force which you can't see. You'll probably never be able to see it, but it exists and helps and heals. Everyone can easily absorb it. You can call it life energy. I call it a healing stream. Not even necessary to go healing here. The universe is undamaged, perfect place, so it doesn't try and heal itself. It tries to create against the feedback of every other input of the infinite amount of parts in the universe. If you get to know the forgotten laws of this force again, you can use it for free at any time and place for your personal health and benefit. You can probably use it better if you share that. The universe likes to reward what you share, so of course you have to do it yourself to bring a reality to it, but then you must share it. So here's a little North Pole, South Pole dielectric equilibrium in cartoon form. And all these pressures around you are actually forming you in your journey of learning and manifesting who you are. And of course, as a human being five-fingered and five-toed, and with our abilities, most of us are supposed to do things with the balance of our mind, our heart, our whole body, and what we can create. But just because you're creating all the time doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing. So I'm kind of pointing out that anything that goes away from your center and what you sense and your own self manifest is taking you away from who you are. So in the end here, we have an outer pole of what represents itself as positive, but is actually negative because it's taking away from driving our own center into development. We're going outside ourselves to figure these things out. So a bunch more names just to get the point across that, we have societies here like Tibetan, and then we have individuals. So individuals were discovering this subtle energy and garnering proof of it, and whole societies already knew of it. So when you cross-reference this stuff, it is what it is. So probably the best book that I've seen, pretty expensive now, basically Claude Swanson, and we're going to do the cliff notes of this. There's great references in here, so if you want to go study Tesla or yogis or whatever, you can get the same stuff out of any direction. It's just a different way of teaching it. So some of the properties of subtle energy, it's sometimes confused with electromagnetism. So when we're building so-called, I'm not even going to say free energy, but higher coefficient of performance engine cycles or energy generators, we often think electromagnetism is responsible for the effect, but it's probably not. But it does have an effect, and it does intertwine with it to a degree at the medium. Tesla called it the medium to another dimension that we can't perceive, that conducts in all matter. So some experiments that I've done, you could measure hundreds of voltages, hundreds of volts AC on wooden countertops, and as you got closer to the ground, the voltage got higher and higher and higher as you went closer to the actual concrete floor in a shop. And when you would power up with one wire a set of light bulbs and charge a battery, and the battery would never die and the light bulbs would never die. I'm not claiming that it's a ton of power, but a human being putting their hand into that single wire circuit and standing on the ground would add energy to that equation, and the bulbs would get brighter. And every human being who held my hand would also make those bulbs brighter. That was subtle energy interacting with the entire environment that had an effect on the electromagnetics. How do we know? Because the battery wouldn't die. The battery started dead. 7 days later, the battery's at full charge. All the lights are on. Can't get the thing to die. One of my first experiments where I was like, all right, this is cool. And it was just a little Tesla running a Tesla coil in a different way. And they would call that, negentropic or entropy, the opposite of entropy. So now we're pulling out things from the book that deal with water and subtle energies to some degree, since we kind of do a lot of water stuff. Reason being is water can hold the subtle energies better than anything else. So, I would rather drink water and get it into my body than have to hold instruments, around my body. But, if more is needed, Reich machines and water and combining it all together, like, give you your own alchemy, right? I know a lot of things work. I probably got 30 different tools in the toolbox, but I probably only use like 5 or 6 of them. And if they're not working, then certainly I start experimenting more with the other ones. You got to watch out for some of this stuff, because people who are claiming they can read your body and vibrate you, diagnose that and put it, that's only goes so far. You need to read your own body, and some of that stuff actually goes off. And they know it, but it's too complicated to explain. So here, we've seen some interesting things with our carbon genes, which, for those of you who don't know, are basically a portable unit that you can seal the water, pull a vacuum, cool it down. There's a magnetic array and the usual flow form scenario, and crystals we make that surround the water. And we manufacture the crystals simply because it's kind of easy to work with pure recipes and mix them together. When you get things that are already all mixed up that you don't know, like shungite, we use that because we've historically used it for over 12 years now, 11 years. And we're okay with that mixture property. And we don't use pure shungite. We use the natural shungite that comes out of the earth. We don't use, what they claim is the really high, the pure stuff is basically robbed of all the character that it was born with. So just like a lot of things, extractions in medicine don't really work as well once you take them out of the fruit. But they can be useful in pointed circumstances. So here you see surface tension going down. And you could do this by a number of ways. They use a ridiculously strong, so you got a 2 Tesla magnet, 20,000. What I just showed you per tip was 4,000, basically 4 to 5,000, and we try and spread that out. We don't want the magnetic effects. We want something else going on, and this is the something else we're after. So it's a little funny that we're using magnets, but we're using them in the same way you would use a crystal, and we're really using them to amplify a crystal and put the water in an environment where it's like an incubator for a human being. It's quiet, it's silent, it's dark, it's cooling down, it's a vacuum. North Pole energy or blue energy is being inserted into the water. There may be there is South Pole energy present because you can't fully separate them. And we've experimented with that and what South Pole elements are and what North Pole elements are. So there's like cheat codes for all this stuff. And your body is a magnetic field with a North and a South Pole, but it's a little different. The biomagnetism is a little bit different. So basically, von Reichenbach, he does the simplest version of this because he used human beings as instruments rather than instruments. And it skips right to the chase and right to the difficulty of it, but it's not overcomplicated. You get into electromagnetics and interferometry and the vibrations and AC superimposed DC circuits and, high voltage effects and independent oscillations that Steinmetz talked about, and negative J squared and negative I squared and blah, blah, blah. Like, this is a whole new front of what does your right hand do? It generally gives out a blue signal or a North Pole. What does your left hand do? Gives out, a red signal and receives. And so when you're going to hold a magnet in your right hand, if you wanted to connect magnets together, the right hole is the north. So if you want it to extend, you better use the South Pole of the magnet in your palm to put the North Pole on someone and give them what the North Pole quality is. Or you want the South Pole, now you know what to do with that. You got a glass in your water, what's your intention? Which hand are you holding it in? If we have a magnetic compression unit and it's a North Pole compression, on the outside of that is the South Pole. So whatever you're holding, even though you're holding a North Pole unit, in your hand, it's sensing the South Pole coupling. And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Some of the healers I've worked with basically said, hey, take the positive pole and put it in your left hand on this Reich machine because it works way better. I don't know why, it just does. I've tested it on my patients. And they had no idea. And I said, well, yeah, the plus is the north and the left hand is the south. And there are exceptions, though. Probably natural left-handed people might be reverse. There are exceptions. So 90% of the time these rules work, and then they don't. And here's a case where somebody overrode the deal. So basically, the next experiment that von Reichenbach, because he realized the magnetic forces and electric forces were biological and human, and they come from the earth in the end, and then there's these discrete pieces, parts. And so at this point, and this is probably going to get even more confusing, the North Pole is actually seeking the north, which means it's actually a South Pole. Forget about that. When we say North Pole magnet, it means North Pole magnet, and it means blue. And when we say South Pole, it means red. That's all you need to know is the color. And then that's the far end of the color spectrum as far as stasis goes. Green is the equilibrium, but we often see a lot of yellow. So maybe like green and yellow are the North and the South Pole together closer to the equator. So the sun's yellow, or most everything that grows on Earth in the basic sense and sets up the foundation. At the dielectric equilibrium or ground is the plants, which are green. So you got yellow and green. It's the same thing as red and blue, only they're just closer together on the magnetic or electromagnetic spectrum, which is really all vibrations. We put it into groups, but it's all vibrations. So he wanted to see if these sensitives could override the Earth's magnetic field and get the pole to attract to them. And indeed, they were able to override the subtle Earth magnetism and switch the pole. And so basically a mind can switch the pole on something. So some things that should work to a practitioner often don't. So what do? You either go to the center or the opposite pole to try and push somebody over if the usual isn't working, or you do that with yourself. Doctor said this works, it doesn't, it's not working at all, it's actually bothering me. Something's wrong with the pole. The chemistry might be right, but the pole is wrong. Find something else that has a similar chemical effect and flip the poles. Water is giving you the deal. Now I'll give you a trick to it. Hydrogen can either emit blue or red, and oxygen can also emit blue or red. So oxygen can flip its pole, and hydrogen can flip its pole, and that's what makes water so beautiful, is it can change to almost any circumstance to line things up and bring more tension or separate things that aren't playing nice together. So this subtle energy, and what he did is he did double blinds with regular people who claim they were sensitive, people who didn't claim they were sensitive but were because they didn't know. He put them in a dark room, and after a couple hours they could see light and color, and they could describe things happening. And then he would put dummies in there to the same people, and they would go, I didn't see anything that time. And he wouldn't tell them it was a magnet. He wouldn't tell them it was a crystal. He wouldn't tell them, but they could predict the correct color. So after many, many experiments, this thing started to show up. He probably didn't know about chi and prana or into any detail, not to like magnetic and electric parodies. So he called it odic energy, which is probably tribute to some other history, and it kind of is previewed as negative ode, which is the North Pole in blue and the plus electrical charge, or minus ode, plus ode, which is South Pole red, the opposites, right? So you see the reddish, is where the blunt end of the crystal is, and the blue is where the pointed end is, and it behaves the same as a magnet. Probably not as strong as a magnet. A magnet is also a crystal, technically. It has a crystalline structure inside of it, and impulses line it up so everything works together to make a stronger, more magnitude version of itself, which is this polarized version, the demon and the angel. Those are north and south poles, right? And the demons don't always have to fight, neither do the angels. That's the other side of the equation. But we always get that story, right? You always have to good and evil. They're always going to battle each other. Not really. It's not really what's going on in nature most of the time. Happens, but it's kind of rare. So they're reddish yellow light, warm and unpleasant. I do agree with the unpleasant because that's kind of subjective. You might want warm and fuzzy, right? In the wintertime, if you're freezing, you'll want warm and fuzzy, right? In the summertime, you'd probably rather be cooled down. So I think unpleasant was sensitives overreacting to like electrical tingle, agitation, if you will, more entropy, more disorder. They were reacting to that. We've experimented with this, and since we don't use a single magnet, we use an orientation of magnets. So I can put multiple magnets in tension, or I can put them in compression. Compression and tension are opposite forces. Again, you can create a north and a south pole out of the deal. And water has some really interesting responses. In my opinion, from what we've seen with south pole compression testing, is that the compression is dominant, meaning it's going to go into generation, and one's probably going to fave hydrogen generation or activity over the other when you put the situation into compression. It's like an incubator. It's like an egg, more or less. You make a field out of it rather than solid object. So the bio-north, the actual south magnetic pole, which other people call bio-north, like, now it's like chemistry and electrical engineers, what I call plus, you call them. We're all confused over what the left and the right hand is and what works the best. Again, each individual needs to decide that. The bio-south, or the actual north magnetic pole, shows a minor effect on cell growth rate. It should be regeneration, basically. Could be agitating for like cancer, which is overproduction of cells. Probably not if it's coupled with the right, prebiotics and probiotics and diet. The good bacteria and single cell organisms will usually dominate. And that's getting to be the preferred method to, not to attack your gut anymore, but moreover to really create an environment where microbiomes that are strong will always dominate over the weak ones that are basically parasitic. So you see here, they're going a really, really long time to get this stuff to happen. So these effects aren't really, really big when you just set a magnet underneath the glass. Our instruments pick up changes in the water because we're using compression and accelerating things. It's called time accelerating. And then we're giving it a north or a south quality. Typically, you'll see why we lean on the North Pole compression property. And here's the classification of different processes done by Baron von Reichenbach. And to be fair, I need to give a little history. Like Baron title, he wasn't born a royal. Getting the Baron title mean he was head and shoulders above everybody else in the European society. That's what that means. He was a very astute conventional chemist. He had patents on paraffin and creosote and other things. And he retired very successfully, and he put his money and life into studying subtle energy. And this is probably the more simple side of the work that came out of it. And so you see there's a magnetic pole associated with all of this, and that's kind of gives you the pairing, the plus O and the minus O, or the odic. So that's how that more or less works. Evaporation, and some of these will go backwards on you, so these are kind of like 90% of the time this is what it is. So there you see the colors and the light again. Now you see properties, so a lot of people would read this. So the bio-north, or the magnetic south, it kind of sounds bad at first. Blunt end of a crystal, who wants to play with that? Warm feeling on the left hand, all right, left side of the body, produced by light, negatively electrified objects, left or counter spin, clockwise spin and torsion. So he's basically comparing, the author of this book is comparing subtle energy from all over the globe, from all different times, right? And this is kind of based on von Reichenbach's odic term and balancing out in the most simplest way. And so you see when you get over to the side, it kind of says things about stunting growth. Treatment of seeds before plants use lower in vital biochemicals. Well, that ain't no good. Thin, tall plants with poor vegetables. Well, who would do that? That's not necessarily true, because what happens in a plant, and this is pretty recent, but everybody knows this, especially since the cannabis industry, is when a plant goes to fruit and seed, yield, and repeat, it would actually be more beneficial to switch the pole on that plant, because it switched its pole. And likes seek each other, so you'd want the south pole during the flower fruit cycle a little bit more. Both are going on. One is just dominant or the other. You see a big plus with reduction of pain, pressure, and infection, and with more psychedelic. So I think that's why they call it like clairvoyant. So the south pole placed on your forehead is rumored to kind of induce things similar to like ayahuasca or maybe mushrooms or LSD or whatever your fancy is. And strong magnets will blur your vision, so you got to be careful with this stuff. I also talked to a guy once who put like a ridiculous amount of magnetism underneath himself in a mat every night, and it was like probably totally disruptive to the normal biological process of his body. And the back of your body has a different charge than the front of your body, and male and females are different. So I believe the female is minus charge, and well, I guess it depends on whose system you're working, so we're not even going to go there. Just know they're the opposite. So when a male and a female come together face to face, that's magnetic coupling. When somebody puts their back to the other one, that's repulsion actually in charge. You can actually measure this stuff on oscilloscopes. Like when you stick a lead to your back, on a male, on me anyways, it has a very sharp like distortion all over the vibrations. And then when you put it to your front, it's more round and smooth. This may be a little bit more useful, the different elements. Some of them might surprise you. The diamond pointing onto the finger, and women's obsessions with diamonds, even though they're just carbon, may have an actual like thing going on. I'm rather certain it does. Gold itself is electropositive, so the south pole and those qualities, and generally does make the water not taste as good, but you might need south pole water. I'll just say with our units, it's much safer to use the north pole and the blue. The accelerating energy, and then you just do less of it if it's over accelerating. And we probably had like 3 or 4 people in history where the regular portable was like too much energy for them. For our regular portable, like it fits the normal human race, and in this day and age, as our consciousness is able to lift, it's probably really not overdoing it for anybody. And so we're designing units with a little bit more power as the human consciousness goes up. And then you can really add to it if you want. So a lot of scientific facts showing what the North Pole does to the water. It makes it softer. It changes the scale of structure. It does everything that our flow forms were doing before, just more of it. So, we have versions coming out of that as amplifiers for just about everything we manufacture as passive water treatment. We're still developing and always develop. It's not that we don't know what we're doing. It's that we're always improving. So just a little reference. You can, too much of anything will overblow and cause the opposite effect again, which is too much imbalance. And that about covers the basis of how it works. So the right hand is the North Pole on the body, and, the left hand is the South Pole. That's the very basic version of it. And they're never equal, and we're favoring one or the other depending on the time of year, the timing, all those types of things.